This video is for adults only. Viewer discretion is advised. Everything I'm sharing is my opinion.
This is Reporter Room with Jessica Della Davies.
If you haven't subscribed, please hit the subscribe button. It's free and it helps me out a lot. Well, hello there. Okay, come on in. We have some updates in the D4vd case. My name is Jessica Della Davies. I'm an investigative journalist, and I am trying to get myself situated. I lost internet for a couple of days, and then I got it back last night, and then I lost it again right before I came on, but it's back. So fingers crossed that I'm able to stay up and going. So did you know that David got his black Tesla back and is free? And meanwhile, Celeste got a grave marker. Does this feel like justice to you? Because it sure doesn't feel like justice to me. I think, we're just going to have to keep our fingers crossed that something more is coming soon. Also, there's been a lot of talk about Neo and why the authorities would be crossing state lines to get him. We're going to talk about Neo a lot today. So David finally retrieved his black Tesla, which was sitting in the impound lot, apparently this whole time. Once law enforcement was done and got Celeste out of it and was done processing the car, nobody from David's camp went to go get the car. And PI Steve Fischer, who was hired by the mansion owner, shared that the Tesla was held by the LAPD only for 48 hours. So it's been sitting there for months. And it was returned for David Anthony Burke, a D4vd, to retrieve. And he didn't do it for months. He finally showed up to get it on Thursday, January the 29th, which was yesterday. So Steve shared that the Tesla was scheduled to go to auction at 9 a.m. today, and that he was planning to go. He wanted to go. He wanted to inspect the Tesla. He wanted to look at it. However, just hours before the auction was about to begin, David or somebody with a power of attorney acting on his behalf, probably the latter, showed up and picked up the black Tesla. He probably needs the money for his lawyers, right? He also, and maybe his lawyer wants to look at the Tesla too. He also revealed that the vehicle, whose storage fees were around $10,500, had been available for pickup since September 10th, even though Celeste had been identified, even before Celeste was identified as being the person in the front trunk of the Tesla. And he concluded saying, I just hope that the thought of the vehicle haunts David and anyone else that knew Celeste was in the trunk for the rest of our lives. So let's pull this up. It makes me sad that this is where we are and that we just don't have justice for her. I'm just going to have some faith that the fact that they did put in, superstar assistant district attorney Beth Silverman, that we will get justice. I don't think they would have put in such a high-powered deputy DA, without it. So I just wanted to show you guys her headstone. This is Celeste. This is what it looks like. I think she looks beautiful. Let me add this to the stage so you guys can see it. All right. So that's her headstone. This is from courtesy of the New York Post. And it says that her grave was at the Queen of Heaven Cemetery, a mortuary in Roland Heights, and it features a polished black granite headstone honoring the teen with a haunting portrait of Celeste, depicted as an angel, flanked by the Virgin Guadalupe and etched butterflies. The black and white, the marker's black and white, except for the AI-generated photo of Celeste. And then it goes into how she was found. It is kind of gross that here we are, and that, let me pull this up too. That we're here we are, and she gets a headstone, and he gets to come pick up his Tesla. I don't know. There's just something that feels gross about that. Here's his post about the Tesla. This is Steve Fischer. Let me make this a little bit bigger so you guys can. can look at it with me. So he says, David's Tesla, which held the remains of Celeste Rivas Hernandez. We're going to talk about Neo a lot today. I just want to get started with this because I don't want Celeste to get lost in the shuffle of all of this. So it was released to the individual who presented notarized paperwork authorizing the vehicle's transfer. He says, I have verified this. That person then transferred ownership into their own name. So we don't know who showed up to pick it up. Probably somebody from his dad's law firm or David's own law firm, in my opinion. He said, I can't disclose the owner's new identity, the new owner's identity. Okay, so I think that does give us a hint. I think it does give us a hint that the new owner, it means that it's not David. So maybe he sold it to somebody too, without violating the rules of my DMV access as an investigator. This is why I always redact license plates, even when they're known publicly. As a licensed investigator with direct DMV access, if I have run that plate number, I have to redact it, even if it's public knowledge, since there is a group that thinks I'm trying to hide the plate numbers, even though they know it. It's clear it was a calculated move to get the car out of public view and out of David's name. I wouldn't be surprised if it's about to be crushed. It's also possible that he sold it to somebody too. You pay off the $10,000, give me a little bit extra, and you can have the car. But this is just the receipts that Steve Fischer showed. And let me pull this up too. Close this one out. Make sure I'm looking at the same thing you guys are. Yeah. Okay. So this is the other post I wanted to go through quickly, and then we're going to deep dive into Neo. So it says that the vehicle was transferred by the LAPD from September 8th. And it was transferred to downtown LA impound lot on September the 10th. So that's the 48 hours. So why it shows false for on hold, I'm attaching the auction listing, which appeared several weeks ago. So he's got the auction listing here, which shows the car, the Tesla model number, which is TX. We've heard TY, we've heard TX, but now at least we know it's TX, 2023, and that the date was September 10th of 2025, and that the pickup date was yesterday, January 29th of 2026. So I thought that was interesting. Just wanted to go over the thing. He says that David's Tesla, the vehicle in which Celeste Rivas Hernandez was found, was held by the LAPD for only 48 hours to process evidence. And after that, it was returned to the impound lot for David to retrieve, which he had not done until today. So he posted this yesterday. He said the Tesla was scheduled to go to auction, however, tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. And I had planned to attend and inspect it. However, in the final hours before the auction, David or someone with POA acting on his behalf picked it up. When I checked last week, the storage fees were approximately $10,500 as the vehicle had been released and available for pickup since September 10th, before Celeste had even been identified. I just hope the thought of that vehicle haunts David and anyone else that knew Celeste was in the trunk for the rest of their lives. And so that brings us to Neo, you guys. So let's dive into that. So David got his Tesla. Neo got a pair of silver bracelets, but he was released on $60,000 bond, the very next morning once he didn't fight extradition. And so there's been a lot of speculation as to how did Neo get a plea deal? Did Neo get a plea deal? I want to show you one other thing too. This is a really good site. Let me take this down for a second. On Reddit, if you are looking for really good stuff, this is by Remy Urganda. She's a really good researcher for the group. It's called D4vd Idiots. And this is Josh Marshall. Here he is. So his wife started posting again. So I'm wondering if this means this is his wife. Did he testify? Is this why everybody is now posting again? Asia's posting again, and now we see that Diana is also posting. She's Mogul Vision founder and D4vd manager. Josh Marshall's wife, Diana, has never made her Follow D IG account private since Celeste came to light. Her IG was a principal source of fact, of photo evidence of her posh Italian wedding to Josh and the D4vd and his entire family attended, despite Josh's later claims that he didn't have a close relationship with David. There have been many examples of Josh being close to David uncovered since, of course, including Josh at the Fonda Theater sitting with D4vd's mom and Celeste, and photos of Josh hanging around outside high schools with D4vd. I haven't seen Josh in those photos, but I have seen Rob M. Back to D. While her Instagram remains public for all her followers, she stopped posting at the end of August of 2025. Well, she's back, and she's posting pictures of herself living the good life as always. There's even a shot of her and Josh Marshall in Paris together. So Josh Marshall gets a trip to Paris, and Celeste gets a gravestone. I don't know, you guys. There's just something that's just making me feel like just very, very upset about the way that this is all going down. It just doesn't feel right. Let me pull this up. So Nancy Grace was also all in on trying to figure out what in the world is going on, what happened to Neo, like what was the deal. So we're going to talk about that. I have some stuff I want to share with you. Her channel is Nancy Grace. It's got 10,000 subscribers. Let's see if we can get her up to 1 million subscribers.
Broiled in the D4vd David Anthony Burke case. It's Steve Fischer, now high-profile private investigator, missing person private investigator.
So I just want to make sure, can you guys hear this before I just go all in and play it? I don't want to play this and then find out you guys can't hear it. And Jazz or Michael, can you let me know if you can hear it or not? Just a quick sound check, you guys. Yeah? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Appreciate that. I'm like, I was like getting my camera going and then I completely lost power. So I'm like a little bit behind. Yeah, okay, great. Thank you. So come on in, tell me where you're from. And let's go ahead. These are our head mods. This is Michael. And this is Njaz. Let's see who else is modding today. Ms. Dizzle Dingle, Purple Angel. Jody is modding. Tara is modding from My Insane World. Cabling is modding. Oh, great. We have great mods today. We are so lucky. Okay. I hope I didn't miss a mod. Oh, Mickdale is modding today. Is anybody else modding? Did I miss anyone? I'm worried I missed someone. I think I got everybody. If you're modding, drop me a comment right now. Okay, let's go ahead. And Lockie says she's very disrespectful to her guests. Well, she pushes them. That's how she gets answers. Let's go ahead and deep dive into this.
Search and rescue expert Steve Fischer. This all started when Langston, aka Neo the Asian, refused to come to grand jury, and they have to go look for him. And of course, he's hiding under mommy's bed in Helena, far, far away from that grand jury proceeding. So they drag him back. That sparked discussion of a plea deal. And I think they're right. Now, some outlets misquoted you, stating that you thought D4vd Burke is going to get indicted. But I think that's backwards. What do you think, Fischer?
Well, you said that about D4vd indicted. They quoted me saying is that he may be getting a plea deal, and then I did not say that. What I said was the fact that they were bringing Langston in on that failure to appear worried me, and I think he might be getting an immunity deal because, quite frankly, I'd expect him to possibly be a target, and then you would typically expect them to bring a target in front.
So the fact that Steve Fischer is expecting that Neo would be a target makes me wonder, because we know that Steve Fischer has more pieces of the puzzle than we have, right? He testified before the grand jury reportedly twice. He has all of the photos. We know he knows he also has a video of who was driving that Tesla when it was parked for the final time on July 29th. on Bluebird Avenue. So I'm wondering if Neo was in the car or driving that Tesla, or if he has photos of Neo with Celeste that we haven't seen yet. Let's continue on, because the fact that he's upset makes me wonder what's going on, really, what he knows about Neo. And I think Nancy Grace is going to try to get to the bottom of this now.
Of the grand jury like that. And it makes me think
Hold on,
maybe
hold that thought, Steve Fischer. I think you're right. Let me go to high-profile defense attorney joining us from this jurisdiction. Is Joanna Nieves, criminal defense attorney, founder of the Nieves law firm. Joanna, here's the deal. Let me just break it down. He has a choice. He can either be a co-defendant or he can be a witness. That's how I'm seeing it from here. Because I guarantee you, Joanna, LAPD, and I've heard this from an inside source, has this huge, huge wall, and they have digital tracking of phone calls, GPS locators, nav system of all of D4vd's friends, including him. Which means they've got it down to the minute. If Langston, aka Neo, was traveling along in a car, and I think I've identified one thing they're looking at, Joanna. It's the night that D4vd goes out into a densely wooded forest area late in the night, 2-3 a.m. Many people think to dispose of a body or scout a spot to dispose of a body. If it turns out that Neo Langston phone was traveling along with D4vd's, he's up the you-know-what creek without a paddle. So he can choose. Did you dig the hole, or do you want to end up in the hole, Langston?
The fact that Neo was like just smiling, like looking so happy too, was really unsettling, I think, for a lot of people. It just kind of feels like these are very unserious people, and that, Neo really isn't taking this as seriously as he should. I mean, Celeste Rivas is gone. Her life was stripped away from her, and she deserves to be here, and she deserves justice. And the fact that he was just smiling so smugly and kind of cavalierly in his mugshot, to me was, let me know what you think. I thought it was disturbing. Put an A in the chat if you agree that it was disturbing. Put a B in the chat if you think, nope, it was fine.
So this is all assuming that he's got information to offer that might incriminate David or even himself. But he may be being called in to stick a timeline down. He may be exculpating David in some way, or another person who is a person of interest in the matter. Really,
I'm sorry, I just choked on my tea. Hold on. Well, let me see.
Nancy does not like the idea that he could be giving exculpatory evidence for David. Let's
see her, please. Joanna Nieves, did you just say, with a straight face, that LAPD puts out a interjurisdictional warrant and tracks down Neo Langston, who is D4vd's bestie, because he has exculpatory evidence that may exonerate Burke? That is not why they dragged him by his toes out from under Mommy's bed. No, because he has evidence. It's a grand jury investigation and charging arm.
I agree with Nancy's assessment on this. I think that they wouldn't have gone through the cost of having U.S. Marshals go to Montana and then the cost of extraditing him back if he didn't have something important that a Deputy District Attorney Beth Silverman needed the grand jury to hear. But let's continue on, because I think this attorney does a great job of making her point.
Absolutely.
Please, let's be real.
They want the information, but also they're required to provide all of the information, not just the things that want to paint the picture that they want to put in front of the grand jury. The grand jury may have additional questions, and Neo Langston may be able to shed light on times, places, locations, and relationships. So it may not necessarily be about this one Santa Barbara trip. It may even be just about what was the nature of the relationship between David and Celeste, if there was anything inappropriate, as many people have been speculating. But there's also speculations of what the relationship may have been between Neo and David himself. So I think that really we don't know what his testimony will be, I do find that it's probably going to be obviously material that they went through these great lengths to get him there. But ultimately, just because he didn't show up doesn't mean that he's got something incriminating for himself or somebody else. He may have just been putting his head in the sand, hoping that this thing disappeared without having to participate.
And that's very possible. It could be that he didn't, he just wasn't hiding because he had something to hide. But it sounds like Steve Fischer believes that he does have something, because Steve Fischer that's private investigator Steve Fischer from SF Investigates. He seems to be concerned and worried that Neo's not getting charged in this and that possibly he's getting an immunity deal. So it makes me wonder what Steve Fischer knows about this that we don't know yet, you guys, that, somehow Neo shouldn't be getting a plea deal. But we know in these cases, you guys, we have been down this road before. We know sometimes, we saw it in the Harmony Montgomery case, that sometimes they have to give a plea deal to make their case, especially if the case is circumstantial. So I don't know if he's getting a plea deal or not, but I think this attorney, the guest of Nancy Grace, is making a really good point.
Let me ask you a question. Where did you go to law school?
Florida State, go Noles.
That's a great school, and you've tried a lot of criminal cases too. But I can guarantee you this technical legal term: they did not drag him back to ask him, what's your relationship with D4vd? That did not happen. He was dragged home from Helena, Montana, back to LA to testify in front of a grand jury and put in jail. And that's not to find out if he and D4vd were up braiding each other's hair at night. Speaking of that, Steve Fischer.
And I think this attorney did a great job holding her own with Nancy Grace. She always pushes to try to get as much information as possible, but I think she stays very calm. She stays very matter of fact, and she does a really good job of making her case, which is, remember, she was brought in by the producer on the show to make this point. So even though you see Nancy Grace pushing back, Nancy Grace is just, doing what she needs to do to get clicks and views. But the attorney, she has a very reputable, skilled attorney that she's talking to, and she knows this.
Steve Fischer, do you agree or disagree with Joanna Nieves? And I'll tell you what she's doing. She's a world-class defense lawyer, and she is painting a pretty picture, a pristine picture for Neo Langston. But I guarantee you they did not drag him all the way back to LA from Montana to find out about his relationship with David Anthony Burke. I want to hear about the disc you found in D4vd's home. What photos were on the disc?
Well, there's 1,100 photos on it. There's a ton, but Neo is in a lot of them with David, and they have a very close relationship. He's at the house a lot. He's him and about like two other people seem to always be around. What worries.
So I'm thinking we know at least one of the other two people is going to be Asia. Who do you think the third person is going to be, you guys?
To me about this, bringing him back, is that they even need his testimony, because if they haven't been able to make the case 5 months later and they need his testimony, I would think he'd be a target instead of a witness. So that's what worries me, that maybe they're going to offer him an immunity deal, which I would hate to see if he has any involvement in this.
Okay, because I was trying to figure out why you're worried about it. But I see what you're saying. You want everyone potentially involved in the death and the dismemberment and the disposal of her body, Celeste, to be prosecuted. I agree. Look at her. Don't take down that picture. That is Celeste.
She is such a beautiful and precious child, which is why I am just almost in tears at the idea that, David gets his black Tesla back and Celeste gets a headstone. Josh Marshall and his wife get to go to Paris. Celeste gets a headstone. It just doesn't feel right, you guys.
That is Celeste. A few short years after that, she's dead. And I want to find out why. I'm with you, Fischer. Hey, Fischer, another thing, guys, the reason Steve Fischer became embroiled in this is the owner of the D4vd mansion hired him to find out what the hell was going on. He had the permission to go into the home and search. Where did you find the disc?
It was left behind in the house. They moved out pretty hastily, and they left a lot of stuff behind. And it was just a memory card from a camera, and it was on the floor, and we were able to recover the images from it. So it was just left behind, but it was a very quick move out, and they left a tremendous amount of stuff behind it, including the burn cage, including the chainsaw, and a lot.
It's very interesting because you guys will recall that the moving company was, they hightailed it out of the mansion. I think it was to keep law enforcement from being able to come in with a second search warrant to get whatever they didn't get on the first one, in my opinion. Let me know if you have a different feeling about it. But I think that was the reason that they hightailed it out of there. But it's very interesting because the security guards who were masked, one was wearing a Kevlar vest, so they didn't want people to know who they were. But they were filming this. And it makes me wonder if David was on the other end of the camera. So was there something specific that he was trying to get out of the mansion? Because Steve Fisher's right. David left a lot of things behind in the mansion, like the chainsaw and the burn cage, and in the and some of the pictures that link him back to Celeste. But what was he looking on video for? What did they want? Why did they move out so fast? And what specifically did he want out of the mansion? That's something we may never have an answer to unless Neo testifies about this.
Other things. So that's how we found
Let me
it.
ask you something. On that disc, you said there are about 1,100 images, including D4vd and Neo lying in bed together. Were they clothed?
Yes, they were.
And photos of them curled up together on a sofa. Were they clothed?
They were, and a lot of these have already hit the internet because some of these he actually took off the camera and posted, like you're showing on screen now. These are the type of images, but the focus seems to be between him and his relationship with him.
Were there any women on there? Any naked photos of women, or is it all Neo and D4vd?
Yeah, there's no provocative photos. It's just women kind of in the background, actually, of him and Neo.
And I've shared with you in the past that I this picture bothers me so much because we have Celeste in the exact same wig. This is David, in my opinion, appropriating everything about Celeste. But I told you guys I thought that David absolutely hated women. That was a profile I did a couple of months ago on him. If you haven't seen that video, I think it's like the psychology of D4vd, and the reason that I think that they went to Santa Barbara County. But the fact that he's wearing Celeste wig here, and the fact that he's with Neo and then with Celeste tells me he really does hate women. Also, the way he talked about his mother also made me believe that this man really hates women.
Okay, let me be clear, Steve Fischer. Let me see, Steve Fischer. I don't care who is whose boyfriend or girlfriend, or who's sleeping together, who's not sleeping together. Really don't care. What I care about is if there is an unbreakable bond between Neo Langston and David Anthony Burke, also known as D4vd. Because if there is an unbreakable bond, I'm not going to get anything out of Langston. He's not going to give it up. And if he's only being charged with failure to appear as a material witness, that's a very light sentence. He'll be in and out in no time for basically a contempt charge. So bottom line, he's going to have to be given immunity. And the reason he has to be given immunity is if you're a target, you can take the Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. If the state says, okay, you've got immunity, we can't prosecute you. Under the law, you can no longer take the Fifth Amendment.
So that's one of the benefits of being the prosecution and giving immunity. I know we've just been looking at this in terms of a negative, in terms of, okay, if he gets immunity, it's bad for justice. But one of the things that you can do, you in the United States, you can't be compelled to testify, about something that will incriminate you. You have the right to plead the Fifth Amendment. So by giving Neo immunity, if they do this, we don't know yet if this is being done, then the that takes away Neo's ability to plead the fifth, and he has to answer the questions truthfully or risk getting a perjury charge. So let's continue on, because I think Nancy is right, and I do want to deep dive into all of this, because I know a lot of you guys have been worried about Neo. Let me say thank you so much to Michael for the $1.99 super sticker. We have another thing we're going to go through after this, but thank you so much, Michael. That is so kind of you. I am really, really grateful. Thank you. And thank you, NJAS, for gifting 5 reporter room memberships. Thank you so much. Guys, if you got one of those, please make sure you say thank you to NJAS. Thank you, Michael, for another $1.99 super sticker. Thank you so much, Michael. I did lose internet for a few days, so this does really help. I'm because I lost days of streaming. I want to thank Ms. Dizzle Dingle for the $2 super sticker. She says, justice for Celeste Abigail Rivas Hernandez. Thank you so much. And I am right there with you. We all want justice. And thank you to Mark the Shark for the $2 super. Thanks for True Crime with Mark. He says, justice for Celeste Rivas Abigail Hernandez. Thank you so much, Mark. Much appreciated. And thank you to NJAS. Thank you, NJAS, for the 20-pound super thanks. Thank you so much. That is really nice. So thank you guys so much. Natasha says, P.S. Last night Nancy had Steve Fischer on. She was pressing him. He obviously could not give information. I do not think he slipped and said instead of them. And she caught that. All right, well, let's listen to this, because this is really really important. We've really been wondering what kind of what's really going on with Neo Langston. This has been bothering a lot of us, and yeah, I want to know. Let me see if I can just put myself here. There we go. We have another interview that we're going to go through after this to juxtapose what's going on with this, and then we're going to go through some more information from Remy.
So what you?
Oh, I do want to give a shout out to Deanna and NJAS, and to Antonia for. Let me see if there's anybody else. Make sure I got everybody for sending me tips and information. I got all of them last night. And Mike, brother Mike, Michael L. Cole. Thank you so much, you guys. All right, let's continue on. Let me back it up just a smidge.
Not going to give it up. And if he's only being charged with failure to appear as a material witness, that's a very light sentence. He'll be in and out in no time for basically a contempt charge. So bottom line, he's going to have to be given immunity. And the reason he has to be given immunity is if you're a target, you can take the Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. If the state says, okay, you've got immunity, we can't prosecute you. Under the law, you can no longer take the Fifth Amendment. So what you said at the get-go is correct. Trying to find out if he's getting an immunity deal. Is he going to be a co-defendant? Because if he's along for the ride, that's aiding and abetting, slam dunk. Or is it?
And I think when she says along for the ride, she's talking about the trip to Santa Barbara County.
More. Okay. While I've got Fischer up on the screen, isn't it true, Steve Fischer, that you amassed ring cam and other video of the neighborhood as D4vd's Tesla was moved from spot to spot? Isn't that true?
Yes, it's true.
And isn't it also true that you saw the face of who was driving the Tesla? Isn't that true?
That is true. I know where
Was
this
it
is going.
Neo? Was it Neo?
I can't say. We've been through this before. I can't. It will come out. I can't. Listen, I don't want to take the chance of somebody. There's somebody taking justice in their own hands. And that's really a possibility in
Well,
this
if
case.
it wasn't Neo, then why would people take justice into their own hands?
Yeah.
Well, until we know, what people's roles are, and whoever the driver was, I don't think people should be, I think it needs to go through the court process. And I would hate to be responsible for putting a name out there than somebody getting hurt because there was vigilante justice.
Okay. How many of you guys think it's Neo? If you think it's Neo, say Neo in the chat. If you think it's somebody else, put somebody else. But it almost sounds like, let's go back and listen to that one more time. It almost sounds like there's a little slide there where she really is pushing hard. She wants to know. She believes it's Neo is driving that Tesla, or at least in the car when whoever parked that Tesla for the final time.
That is true. I know where this is going.
Was it Neo?
I can't say. We've been through this before. I can't. It will come out. I can't. Listen, I don't want to take the chance of somebody. There's somebody taking justice in their own hands. And that's really a possibility in this case.
Well, if it wasn't Neo, then why would people take justice into their own hands?
Big pause there. Let's listen to her just ask that question and let's just let it play. Let's see.
Tesla. Isn't that true?
That is true. I know where this is going.
Was it Neo?
I can't say. We've been through this before. I can't. It will come out. I can't. Listen, I don't want to take the chance of somebody. There's somebody taking justice in their own hands. And that's really a possibility in this case.
Well, if it wasn't Neo, then why would people take justice into their own hands?
Well, until we know, what people's roles are, and whoever the driver was, I don't think people should be, I think it needs to go through the court process. And I would hate to be responsible for putting a name out there than somebody getting hurt because there was vigilante justice.
You're worried about putting who out there and getting hurt?
Anybody that happened to be driving a Tesla that day.
Because I think you said him. Have you handed all this over to the LAPD?
Of course, yeah. We handed it over, the day that.
Okay, so we know whoever parked the Tesla was a male, and there was a long pause. So I think Nancy really does believe it's Neo. Let me know what you think.
That we did it with a report, breaking down frame by frame.
Got another question for you, even though you're not point blank giving me a name. Steve Fischer, was it just one person moving the car, or did that person come with a buddy? Were two people moving the car at the same time?
No, I will say it was one person.
One person. Every time the car was moved because...
okay, because I was under the impression that there was one person in the car and a passenger. No. Okay, it's one person. And we know that the two people who hopped on the bus that day were Neo and David. So let's continue on.
It was moved several times.
One person, and it was a male.
Was it always the same person moving the car?
So we only have a surveillance of it being moved that last day, which was July 29th, 3rd. It's escaping me right now. That last day, which is the day they left for tour, we only have the surveillance of that. We have reports from neighbors of where the car was parked back in May and stuff, but that surveillance, unfortunately, had been overwritten.
So just to be clear, we know that the car was parked on Bluebird multiple times. We know that the car was moved its final time on July 29th. We know that Neo and David, and I believe Asia, also got on that tour bus on July 29th. For sure, David and Neo, but possibly also Asia, but she could have joined later too. Got on the tour bus later the day on July 29th. And we know that we know that Celeste was not frozen. So whoever moved that car would have definitely smelled something, in my opinion. So it's hard to believe that this would just be somebody who didn't know what was going on.
An out-of-state warrant issued by LAPD is a failure to appear when Langston fails to appear as a mandated witness for a grand jury in the homicide of Celeste. Montana police assist LAPD when Langston captured at his mother's house in Helena. Langston taken to Lewis and Clark County Jail, held without bond, before being transferred into the custody of LAPD, extradited to LA and booked.
A plea deal in the works? That's the question tonight. This after the arrest of D4vd David Anthony Burke's best friend and running buddy, Neo Langston, a.k.a. Neo the Asian. Okay, straight back out to Steve Fischer.
We're going to go back to Steve Fischer, but this is his mugshot for those of you that did not see it. I mean, again, just very unserious, just kind of smiling there. I don't know. Like what was so funny, like why he thinks this is funny. Again, David got his black Tesla back. Celeste got a headstone marker. Josh Marshall gets to go to Paris with his wife. Celeste gets a grave marker. I mean, it's just, you know, it's upsetting. It's gross.
For joining us, private investigator hired by the owner of D4vd's mansion, Steve Fischer. You mentioned immunity when you first started talking. Why did you say that? What are your sources telling you?
Well, I just think that if indeed this is for a grand jury failure to appear, if they need him, I think they're bringing him in as a witness and not as a target. And I think he would have gotten a target letter. And like you said earlier, you know, he'd plead the fifth. So if they need him and he's got information, that means the case made yet in my mind, and he probably offered immunity. And I just can't believe at this point, in 5 months later, and with all the digital evidence that's out there, that they need his testimony. But if they do, then I'm afraid for the case, to be honest with you.
So he's concerned that that justice is not going to be done for Celeste because they appear to need Neo's testimony because it wasn't a target letter. It was a subpoena as a witness for failure to appear. So it does sound like, in my opinion, allegedly, that Neo was driving the Tesla, that he was the last one in the Tesla on Bluebird Avenue, driving it to its final place before it was towed.
And there you see Neo Langston handcuffed, hands behind him, with armed law enforcement wearing tack gear, putting him in the back of a cruiser.
And those are U.S. Marshals, you guys. Those are U.S. Marshals. So this would have been costly to bring him back. So I think he must have something that the Deputy District Attorney, Beth Silverman, needs for her case. That's
from our friends at the Independent Record. And again, I find it really hard to believe that he's just coming in to discuss his relationship with D4vd. Under Mommy's Bed. Dr. Cheryl Arrett joining us, clinical forensic psychologist. Find her at creativeemdr.com. Dr. Arrett, thank you for being with us. Why does everybody go home and hide out at Mommy's house? I mean, I've said it a million times at a BF calendar, bond forfeiture. Here's his mom's address. Just go straight out there. I'll wait. He'll be back in about 20 minutes.
And a lot of people think that David is also at his parents' address.
Why?
That is such a great question, Nancy. And I think it's because it is the safest place in the person's mind when they are running and they don't know where else to go. Running to mom is the place to be. And you're right. It could save everybody a lot of time to just head right there. Absolutely.
Alexis Tereszczuk joining us there in LA, Crime Stories investigative reporter. Alexis, what do we know about Neo Langston? What do we know about his relationship with D4vd? What do we know about a potential plea deal going down for either him, Langston, or Burke?
What we know about him is Neo Langston is a Twitch streamer. So he plays video games online and other people join him and watch him. Super popular, very well known. He and D4vd are best friends. Some people think that he's actually his assistant. So he would help him out with everything, with travel and business and booking anything for him. Not his record label, just his personal assistant. They are together all the time. They're constantly together. photos, videos, appearances live. He was there by his side for a very long time. The plea deal is just coming to light. Perhaps there may be one. The thing is, he has only been charged with failing to appear as a witness, nothing else. And as you remember in court a couple months ago, there was concern that this witness didn't show up. It stopped the grand jury proceedings. D4vd's representative from his record label was saying, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing here. I wasn't the one that was in charge of like turning him into the police or anything like that. But the prosecutors really wanted to speak to this Fred Langston. He did not show up. They expected him to show up. They were all in court that day. So it took a couple of weeks for the LAPD to get the warrant and have it served in his house in Montana, or his mom's house in Montana. There so far has not been any release of the plea deal. And again, he was only brought here just because he failed to appear as a witness. So the prosecutors want to talk to him. They want to know exactly what he saw when he was in this house, because he appears to be D4vd's closest friend.
Well,
And he would have a lot of information about David and Celeste, in my opinion.
Alexis Tereshchuk, I hear what you're saying, but he can be a witness today and a defendant tomorrow based on what happens at this juncture. Many times you and I have investigated and covered cases where we start off with one charge and it morphs into something much more serious. The only thing that makes me believe he will remain a witness is because he was called to testify, and you can't make a target testify.
And the thing is, he has seen so much more with him than Celeste ever was. There's so very few pictures of Celeste. The last one we have is from over a year ago at this point, really almost 2 years. But Neo and D4vd are together all the time. So he may just have seen something. They just want to talk to him right now, but he refused to come into the grand jury, fled the state, hid out with his mom, but then the LAPD brought him back.
They've got a chart at LAPD that you would not believe. They've got this thing down to a timeline.
Okay, this is Mark Garagos. You probably know him best from, he's a famous criminal defense attorney. He defended Scott Peterson in the Lacey Peterson trial, and he is appearing on Two Angry Men with Harvey Levin from TMZ.
It's almost by the minutes triangulated to the location, if you can believe that. And it's not just one source. When I say triangulated, it's media, social media, cell phone, Tesla, other, and all I'll say is other kind of GPS tracking devices.
This from our friends at Two Angry Men, Levin and Garagos.
Okay, so I think that's, really, really interesting. We're going to come back to that, but I want to hop over because, let me just grab this. Jesse Weber from Sidebar also had an attorney on to talk about Neo, and I thought this was really, really interesting. So let's go.
He has been arrested, and it's not a surprise that he may have some information. We believe that he's been a very close friend to David, and so he may very well have more intimate details about David's relationship with Celeste, may have been around her, may have some information that would lead law enforcement to believe that he could have had some very direct knowledge of how she was ultimately murdered, or even been a participant.
And before I get into Steve Fischer, who's the private investigator that's been involved in this case, he has some thoughts on Neo Langston that I definitely want your take on. Isn't it possible that if Neo Langston was being brought back to testify in front of the grand jury, he could plead the fifth? And would he plead the fifth in front of the grand jury?
He can certainly plead the fifth, and that's his right against self-incrimination. What would be very smart for him to do is to ensure that he has counsel before he goes in and testifies. And certainly now he's facing criminal charges. And so he's going to need counsel to represent him regardless.
So Neo, his family has money. He's a, Nepo baby. Which means his mother has, is wealthy. That's what I mean by that.
The attorney would be able to sort of have a conversation with the district attorney's office about what information he is willing to give or is not willing to give, or what testimony he's willing to testify to in the grand jury.
Let me get your take on what Steve Fischer said. So again, Steve is somebody we've had on Sidebar before. He is the private investigator who was hired by the property owner where David was apparently staying at the Hollywood Hills. This is near where the Tesla was found. And he posted this first. There's two messages. First, this is what he posted after Langston's arrest. Quote, "The arrest of Neo Langston for failure to appear to give testimony," which are the exact words used by the sheriff's department when speaking with me, "concerns me to a certain extent, assuming this arrest is related to the Celeste Rivas Hernandez case." Targets are not typically called to testify in a case. At the state level, target letters are not always required, but subpoenaing a target without providing notice is extremely risky. A defense attorney would likely argue that any testimony was coerced. Had Neo received the target letter, he almost certainly would have retained counsel and invoked his Fifth Amendment rights. That makes me think that he's viewed as a witness rather than someone currently at risk of being charged. Did one person act alone in concealing Celeste's body? If this was a homicide, did a single individual act alone without a conspirator? I find that unlikely. This leads me to believe that Neo may represent a last-ditch effort by prosecutors, a Hail Mary of sorts, because they do not yet have what they need to fully make the case. They may be attempting to pressure him into cooperating, potentially by offering immunity. Is Neo the last hope? If that is the situation, it suggests the case is largely circumstantial, which could help explain the prolonged delay. I may be misreading the situation, but when I learned of Neo's arrest, my stomach dropped. I am deeply concerned about both the strength of the case and the pursuit of justice for Celeste.
And this is something that, all of us are concerned about, that justice is served. So that's why I wanted to share this with you.
While charging one person is better than charging no one, everyone who bore any culpability in this minor's death or in the concealment of her body should face the most severe punishment available under the law.
And in rereading this statement by Steve Fischer after listening to him on Nancy Grace's show, it does make I'm becoming more and more convinced, in my opinion, allegedly, that it was Neo driving that Tesla, which is why he's so upset.
However, it doesn't feel like that will be the case. Not to me anyway. Hashtag David, hashtag Celeste Rivas Hernandez. And then he follows it up with another X post. Quote, "What I am most curious about in the Celeste Rivas Hernandez case is what David's reaction or explanation was when it was disclosed on September 8th that a body had been found in a car registered to him. The only people who would know that are those who were on tour with him at the time. I know Neo started the tour with him, but I do not believe he was there for the entire duration. Rob, probably Robert Morgenroth, his manager, who we'll talk more about, Rob likely was involved, but he may not have been on the road continuously or present at every show. Isaiah, however, I believe, was with David the entire time on the road and at each show and was with him the day the news broke." And by the way, I think Isaiah could be possibly Isaiah Collins, who's maybe a streamer of some kind, maybe a performer. There has been talk about whether or not there was a connection to David, but let's keep going. "I believe that because Isaiah left her car at the rental house on the day they boarded the tour bus for the first show in San Francisco."
Whoa. Okay. So it sounds like she left her car at the rental house. So she did get on that tour bus. We know whoever drove the Tesla got on the tour bus, you guys. Let's continue on.
Francisco in July. Her car was not picked up until September 19th when her father retrieved it late that evening as seen on surveillance. It would be extremely telling to know how those conversations unfolded after it became public that Celeste's body had been found. I am sure there was shock, not about the body itself because they already knew about that, in my opinion, but about the fact that the world was now or knowing of what kind of people they are.
So he's including Asia in this, not just Neo, you guys, in his statement, Steve Fischer. Remember, Steve Fischer has the most pieces of the puzzle that of anybody who's speaking publicly right now.
Who can do this to a 14-year-old or even have knowledge of it and still live with themselves? Months later, and not even a single offer of condolences to Celeste's family and friends from any of them. Nobody has ever been convicted of a crime by offering a condolence. And if people are offered immunity, it doesn't mean they're not guilty. It means they got lucky. But karma does not care about luck. To be clear, I am sick and bleeping tired of each day that goes by that those responsible are not behind bars. It's time to bleep and pay for what you or each of you did.
Okay, so that is Steve Fischer. And so he is coming for Neo and Asia in this post, you guys. So this is why I wanted to play this. I wanted to juxtapose this with his interview with Nancy Grace. But let's listen to him because this attorney that Jesse Weber is interviewing is excellent.
Safa, quite the statements there from Steve Fischer. But I guess, his main complaint is, why hasn't there been an arrest? Why hasn't there been a charge? Is this the last-ditch effort to go with Neo? Because it seems that he's suggesting this is somebody who could have been brought up on charges as well. Is the government trying to make a deal here? I mean, why is this person being called as a potential witness if all the reporting is true?
So there's a few things to unpack here. And I think the first thing that we have to look at is, with respect to grand jury proceedings, those are secret and confidential. So I don't think that we have enough information to speculate as to the specific evidence that is going to be entered into grand jury through those witnesses. Now, I think the question is whether or not there could be one or more individuals that are charged with Celeste's murder. And so a part of what has to be proven is the identity of the person who has committed that crime, or identities of individuals. So with respect to Neo or Mr. Langston, there is a question here, and of course we're just speculating as to whether or not he had any level of involvement in the actual murder.
Remember, if they don't get Neo on record, they can't, they may not, the defense team for David is going to use him as their potential suspect, right? Their secondary, their alternative suspect is what they call it. Let's continue on.
There's a question of how long he had been with David on tour. There was his absence from the tour at a certain point in time. And so we would want to know ultimately if that coincides with the time of her murder, which would also be information that will likely be presented to the grand jury to bring about an indictment. We're not going to see an arrest unless there is an indictment by the grand jury. And so what I think Mr. Langston's role is here is likely that they want him to cooperate and testify against David. My speculation would be that David is their suspect, considering that he's the one that had an intimate relationship with Celeste. Ultimately, something occurred that resulted in her death. He may have had other individuals that participated in the concealment of her body, but we don't know that as of yet. And all of these things are alleged. We're just speculating.
I guess this can.
Okay, so I think that gives us, at least some more insights into this and how we got here. I want to say thank you to Marie Horan for the super thanks. Thank you so much, Marie. I am really grateful. Thank you so much. For those of you wondering where I was, we didn't have power. We got it back last night. And then right before I was going live today, I lost internet, but I got it back. So I'm back. So thank goodness for that. Mark the Shark became a Reporter Room channel member. Welcome to the Reporter Room family. Thank you so much. Glad you're here with us. And I want to welcome Michelle Bishop, and can say thank you to her for being a channel member for 10 months. She says, thanks for all your hard work, Jessica, and the mods. And we have awesome mods, you guys. So thank you so much to everyone who's modding today. And thank you to Njaz, who gifted 5 Reporter Room memberships, you guys. Wow. Thank you so much, Njaz. That is really kind of you. If you got one of those memberships, please make sure you say thank you to Njaz. So Red Bunny Baby says SF needs to stop accusing people like Neo in Asia. Well, I didn't hear him accusing anybody. I heard him, I didn't hear him accusing anybody. I think he was careful. I didn't hear him name anybody. I heard him being pushed to name somebody and maybe letting it slip a little bit. But we're also hearing that, Neo and Asia were at the house. So, I appreciate SF Investigates that he's coming forward. But we don't always have to agree. We're not going to all agree on every single thing. My Little Star says, my stomach hurts so bad. I'm sorry. I hope you feel better. Ms. Jizzle says, welcome to all the new channel members. We appreciate you. Thank you, Marie. Really appreciate you. Thank you for modding today, Holly. She says that she hopes you feel better. All right, let's continue on with this, because this, I think, and this juxtaposing this with the Nancy Grace interview, I think is really helpful. It gives us, kind of puts the pieces together for us. So let's continue on with Law and Crime, Jesse Weber, and his guest, who is
concern is right, like he's thinking lawyer. It's either, it can't just be David, it has to be multiple people. Because, by the way, Mark Garagos, the acclaimed attorney, once made the point that people he spoke to in this case believe there is a second person that authorities were looking at using social media activity.
Yeah, we've heard that there was an accomplice. So who was the accomplice?
cell phone data, the Tesla digital data, they're able to track this person. I don't know if it's Neo. I don't know if it's somebody else. But you're saying, I mean, it is possible that there could be somebody else we don't know, unidentified, that may be involved in this. It's not just put all the focus, like it's just Neo and David. There could be more.
There could be security guards too involved, but let's listen to the lawyer because, she's got a really great handle on that.
That is absolutely a possibility. And if we're going with that, there was more than one individual that is ultimately a suspect in this case. Let's use Mr. Langston as an example, that he is the other individual that could be responsible. That is where the immunity may come into play if he's going to testify in grand jury. Not only that, but we also do have to deal with the fact that if he's not going to receive immunity, but he's been subpoenaed as a material witness, what information can he provide that would ultimately satisfy the prosecution, but also prevent him from incriminating himself from anything further? So that's where his attorney is going to come into play and ultimately have a conversation with the district attorney to say, this is what he will testify to, and this is what he will not testify to. And if
remember, Neo has a right, this is all of us do in the United States, not to incriminate ourselves. That's why they have the option to plead the fifth. The only way for the prosecutor to get around that is to make some kind of a deal. And by giving him an immunity deal, it takes away his ability to plead the fifth. Otherwise, he could just take the stand and say, I plead the fifth, I plead the fifth, I plead the fifth, and not tell the grand jury anything. So the prosecution may be forced to give him an immunity deal. Is it fair? I don't know. Is it right? I don't know. Let me know what you think about this. I guess it just depends if he is the one that was driving that Tesla. It's hard to believe that on July 29th, since we know Celeste wasn't frozen, that whoever was driving that Tesla didn't know she was in the front trunk.
If he doesn't want to testify, he certainly doesn't have to, but we now know that he has been arrested for ultimately not coming to testify. And so that's going to be something that he's going to have to deal with, unfortunately, as this case continues to proceed. And maybe there won't be an indictment without his testimony. So that would explain that last-ditch effort to have him come in and testify. But because there may be some culpability there, he has to be very careful with what he's going to present forward.
By the way, Steve Fischer maybe testified in front of the grand jury too. This was based on his ex posts, reading between the lines of what he said to us on Sidebar. If that is true, why would he have testified? What evidence do you think he can share that would be of value to prosecutors?
It seems that Mr. Fischer does have a significant amount of information, or probably has a little bit more intimate details with respect to what the allegations are. And so he may be able to provide information with respect to any alleged suspect and where they have been located at the time or on or around the time where Celeste was murdered, who was on tour with David, at what point did they leave or return, what David's location was at that time. Not only that, but if we're talking about the area where the vehicle was located or in Hollywood Hills, then he may have some jurisdictional information there that would be provided to law enforcement to ultimately bring about an indictment and sort of just tie in the loose ends. He certainly could be used for that.
Okay, so with that in mind, let's go back to Nancy Grace. I don't want to play her music. Okay.
Of D4vd, aka David Anthony Burke, is caught at his mother's house in Helena, Montana, and brought back to LAPD. Who is Neo Langston?
Neo Langston is not only a close friend of Burke, but is also a popular Twitch streamer often referred to as Neo the Asian. Neo is known for his high-speed, energetic streaming persona and vlogs featuring his buddy Burke.
You are seeing video now of Neo Langston and D4vd, straight out to forensics expert, professor of forensics, Jacksonville State University, author of Blood Beneath My Feet on Amazon, and star of a hit podcast, Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. More important is the fact that he is a death investigator who has investigated over 10,000 death scenes, be they accidental, natural causes, suicide, unexplained, or homicide. Tonight, a huge step forward in the investigation. What impact does this have forensically on the case? Now that we know Langston has been brought back to the jurisdiction and will testify in front of the grand jury, What forensically does that mean? What would you be looking for now?
Okay, this is very critical, and here's why. Just give me a little bit of rope here, Nancy. The idea that all of these people, we're talking about Celeste, who, seems to get lost in the mix here, this child, they're all living at this same address. And when we as investigators begin to peer into what has happened, we begin to talk about all of the principles that are involved in this environment. So what points of contact are there relative to her and all of these other subjects in the house? I think that it's critical with Langston because, look, he is at the house. We've heard this over and over and over again very frequently. So you're telling me that suddenly she up and vaporizes and you don't have any questions about, hey, what happened to Celeste? And so if he has knowledge of what happened, if there's any kind of talk that happens in this very intimate environment, well, yeah, we saw her, but now she's not here. Or maybe somebody just makes an off-the-cuff statement. It's like, well, last time I saw her, she was in the bathroom, and then she disappeared. I want to know how many times have they seen her in the past? Was there any kind of trauma that they've ever witnessed that was inflicted upon her? Because I'm going to go to those specific locations and look for any kind of trace elements that are left behind. He is a major thread in this case because he has intimate knowledge of her movements through the house. What space did she occupy when she slept in this house?
Or was she stashed at the Doheny property, you guys? Because a lot of us believe that that's where she was. So, but we do know that she was seen at the mansion. And the reason we know this is that neighbors reported, according to the SF Investigates PI Steve Fischer, that neighbors reported seeing Celeste with David. They said she was always with David. But let's listen, because this guy's a great guest on Nancy Grace.
Is there any, and is it very specific? And also, are there any tools around the house that we weren't aware of at the particular time? Steve's talked extensively about chainsaws and burn cages and all this other stuff. And he said that a lot of stuff had been left behind. I'm curious as to what may have been taken away from there to facilitate, hang on to it, the utility of a dismemberment, Nancy. I want to know, what did they have at their disposal and who else was in that house?
Remember, he had his security guards videotaping, David did, videotaping the movers, moving his stuff out of the mansion. Somebody was watching that video feed when they were moving his things out of the mansion. There was something specific that he wanted out of the mansion so that the LAPD didn't get it. What was it?
I'm very curious also, Jessica Morgan. They've brought Neo Langston back to the jurisdiction, rousted him out of his mom's house. They've got to have his fingerprints. So, were his fingerprints on any of these items, such as the burn cage, such as the implements used to, well, you know what? I've got Steve Fischer. The implements that you found there, in addition to a burn cage, which I believe you said gets up to 1,600 degrees, you were concerned about other implements, seemingly farm implements that could be used in the dismemberment of a body.
I had a lot of people asking me where I got the farm implements from. It's because this has been discussed on by Steve Fischer on multiple channels. So you may have watched one channel where he referred to it as something that he found, in another one where he specifically used the words farm implements together. And so obviously it was probably Nancy Grace that I saw it on. I just couldn't remember which show it was. Let's continue on. And then remind me at the end, I want to give you guys a personal update for myself.
Now they've got Neo Langston. I don't think he had a record or any reason to give a fingerprint up until now. But now they have his fingerprints. What do you think they're doing with those prints right now, Steve Fischer?
Yeah, I suppose they're probably comparing them against probably prints from the Tesla from places, in the house. The burn cage wasn't open, but the chainsaw was out of its packaging. There was also, I'll tell you, that there was knives. David seemed to have this infatuation with knives. There's a lot of pictures of him with I don't know if they're switchblades, but switchblade looking knives. And There was, I'll tell you, there was one in that was on a shelf in a closet in a bowl, and that was so. I think they'll compare prints against things like that.
Okay, so we've seen the knife that he waved around on the video. We've seen the knife where he held it up against the cityscape, where he had the mirrored head of Celeste, which was supposed to be before the final photo of Celeste that we know about on January the 2nd. So now we're finding out there was a knife in a bowl. Why would you have a knife in a bowl? That type of knife. This wasn't like an eating utensil.
What did you say?
In the shelf in the closet. Let's back it up and listen to this. This is the first time we're hearing about this.
What do you think they're doing with those prints right now, Steve Fischer?
Yeah, I suppose they're probably comparing them against probably prints from the Tesla from places in the house. The burn cage wasn't open, but the chainsaw was out of its packaging. There was also, I'll tell you, that there was knives. David seemed to have this infatuation with knives. There's a lot of pictures of him with I don't know if they're switchblades, but switchblade looking knives. And there was one that was on a shelf in a closet in a bowl, and that was so. I think they'll compare prints against things like that.
What did you say was in a closet in a bowl?
There was a knife, and listen, I will say that I used Blue Star and didn't come back with anything. But there was a knife, one that you would use for filleting, and it's just sitting in a bowl and on a shelf in a closet with nothing else in it, nothing else in the closet besides that.
So was David be like a total ghoul and just using her by keeping her in the trunk as like some type of weird thing to toy around with? This is like getting worse and worse, you guys.
That leads me to a question to Dr. Cheryl Arrett. Here is a guy who's basically raised in the lap of luxury. His dad is a digital expert lawyer who is handling the digital evidence for very high profile cases, right? So why does he pose himself as like straight out of Compton? What's that all about?
He's a rapper. He is, I think has been very popular and understands the culture, and I think that the way that he was living was consistent with being privileged and also being in that community, and so I don't really see any discrepancy in that. I do have some.
Okay, so have you ever been to?
Let's go back to that picture for a second. Did you see that?
Sure.
You can see the burn bot.
He's
in the background.
He is, I think, has been very popular and understands the culture, and I think that the way that he was living was consistent with being privileged and also being in that community, and so I don't really see any discrepancy in that.
Is that the burn? Is that the burn cage? You guys, I think it is right in the background. So he's not like some rapper from the hood. He's not a rapper. He's a musician, but he was definitely trying to like make out, but he was very well off, came from a very privileged background, but he rewrote his own history to, make out that he, was creating music in his sister's closet, and he's really just a rapper from the hood, when we know that he came from a very well-to-do family.
I do have some.
Okay, so have you ever been to Compton?
What I mean is I don't see any discrepancy between him being in rap culture and being privileged. I understand that he wasn't living like he was in Compton, of course.
Okay, Joanna Nieves joining us, criminal defense attorney, founder of the Nieves Law Firm. He is assuming the persona of a badass rapper. Okay. He is a privileged kid whose parents fed him with a silver spoon. what's with that?
I mean, I think we can't blame him for his artistic expression, right? This is exactly that, a persona. It's attracting fans, it's attracting viewers, it's
attracting kids. Let's just be real. It's attracting kids, you guys. That's what he was trying to attract with all that Hello Kitty garb. And there's him with Celeste at the Doheny property.
It gets paid, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's who he is at the core and that he can be prosecuted for what he put on display in his concerts or his performances.
Okay, so I don't believe anyone suggested that he's going to be prosecuted for his performances. His performances are great. What I'm saying is he had a completely different persona than who he actually really is. Okay, to just Scott Morgan joining us. Now that, back to where we started here, I took us on a circuitous route. Back to where we started, Neo Langston was arrested and fingerprinted. We have the prints. Now what do we do?
I'm going after DNA, hands down. As a matter of fact, anybody that occupied the space, I'm getting a buccal mucosal swab off of them. And also, I would hope that the scene has been thoroughly searched.
And what you're seeing right there on the screen, that's David's brother. And that's Celeste Rivas in the pink pants and the black hoodie at the Fonda Theater in the summer of 2024, where we saw Celeste sitting with his family up in the balcony. And we've also seen pictures of Josh Marshall, who claimed he barely knew David. He didn't say, I'm paraphrasing, he didn't use those exact words, but distancing himself.
That it was sampled by law enforcement for any other sources of DNA. And Nancy, listen to me and listen to me good. I'm going to go here in this particular case. I'm not just merely talking about touch DNA. I want to know if there's any seminal deposition around this place. I want to know who it links back to. I want to know who was there. Because as far as I'm concerned, Celeste's case, it has a flavor to it relative to the way she was treated. She's objectified. She is dismembered. I think that they treated her like she is a play toy. And I want to know, in intimate spaces around that house, bedrooms, sheets, toilets, I don't care where it is, you pursue this as fully as you possibly can. And as my granddaddy used to say, let the hide come with a hair. Whoever's there, we're going to develop a profile on them, and they're going to be brought in for questioning. Now, some of the stuff is going to be very passive. You can have touch DNA. And I think that defense attorneys will argue this. Well, they occupied the space, so you would expect to find. But you have to consider the source of the DNA. What is it? Because some things are richer than others. We've got tons of cases out here, Nancy. We're solving them now based upon seminal deposition that took place years and years ago. It all depends on how far the investigators and scientists are willing to go in this particular case.
And just thinking about that makes my stomach churn. It just makes my stomach churn. It's so disturbing to think about these grown men, all these adults that were, around her, and the fact that she was put in the front trunk of David's 2023 $100,000 Tesla and just left there. And as I shared with you, I believe that he hung onto her, that it was power and domination for David. But it does make me wonder if any of the other people that were in the mansion, what was happening to Celeste toward the end. The last known picture we have of her is January 2nd. So what was happening to her in the last months of her life? And that picture that we have of her in the hoodie, she looks sad.
Joe Scott, you keep referring to touch DNA and seminal deposition. You're throwing around a lot of highly technical forensic terms. When you say seminal fluid, you mean which suggests sex activity.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, when you're talking about touch DNA, could you explain that, as only you can do so well?
Yeah, I would love to. So, listen, the Jergens has made tons and tons of money right off of dry skin. The reason we have dry skin is that we have dead skin cells that we slough every day. People don't realize this. You slough thousands of these things all of the time. So when you touch a surface, you can actually leave behind a skin cell, and it's not going to be a complete DNA molecule. It's going to be fragmented, but it can be amplified, and you can develop a profile on that. That's where I'm drawing this difference between the sourcing of the DNA. Okay. So yeah, you would expect somebody that's touching a doorknob, a counter, those sorts of things, or even handling, cookware, knives, cutlery, anything like that. You could find touch DNA in these environments, but it's a completely different animal when you begin to think about bodily fluids. All right.
And this is what we don't know yet, you guys. We know what Steve Fischer found in the house. We don't know yet what the LAPD found in the house. And remember, they were in there first. They were inside the house with their search warrant first. So what were they able to get, and what do they have?
Another level at this point. And so we would have questions relative to this. Maybe it means nothing, but as an attorney, if you never ask a question, you never get an answer. And so that's going to be up to them to see how thoroughly they've investigated this space, and if they can tie this back to anybody that's in there.
Burke has a very small circle of friends, and even though the friends have not been named publicly, police know where each friend lived inside the house rented for Burke. Investigators have triangulated signals of all cell phones, social media, the Tesla, and more for Burke's inner circle.
And that's why that clip from Mark Garagos and Harvey Levin from Two Angry Men is so important. It's about the triangulation. We've talked about geofencing. For those of you that don't know what geofencing is, geofencing, which is the triangulation that they're talking about, means that when you go into a coffee shop or the hospital or even the grocery store, your phone will be offered the opportunity to log into their system. Whether you accept the opportunity or don't accept the opportunity, it doesn't matter. It's your phone and the server that offered you this, so the grocery store or the coffee shop, that will also, both your device and their device will register what's called a handshake. This is called geofencing. And this is why stores sometimes know why you'll sometimes go to the store and then suddenly you'll see ads for that store pop up in your feed. It's because it's being used by advertisers to track you where you go, what you like to shop, what you like to do, but it's also being used by authorities. So this geofencing and the fact that they're triangulating this is really, really important. So with that context, let's back it up just in 1 minute and listen again to what he is sharing with us.
Knives, cutlery, anything like that, you could find touch DNA in these environments, but it's a completely different animal when you begin to think about bodily fluids. All right. We're at another level at this point. And so we would have questions relative to this. Maybe it means nothing, but as an attorney, if you never ask a question, you never get an answer. And so that's going to be up to them to see how thoroughly they've investigated this space, and if they can tie this back to anybody that's in there.
Burke has a very small circle of friends, and even though the friends have not been named publicly, police know where each friend lived inside the house rented for Burke. Investigators have triangulated signals of all cell phones, social media, the Tesla, and more for Burke's inner circle. Neo Langston is one of those people in the inner circle, having been close to Burke for years, sharing time and space, creating digital content and vlogs.
So I think that's really important. I think the fact that Neo is, is in there, creating all of this, I think it's really important. So I want to go back now to this attorney that was appearing on Law and Crime Sidebar with Jesse Weber.
And as I mentioned, he's looking at that house that David was apparently staying at in the Hollywood Hills. And if you think back to that, again, this is again back when Celeste's body was found on September 8th, authorities afterwards executed a search warrant at that property, reportedly took evidence, like maybe even a computer. It was also reported that David had broken the lease, that he moved this stuff out. Talk to me about what evidence you...
So this is the movers. You can see the footage, and I've shown you guys pictures too of movers filming, of the security guards filming those movers. And I believe that David ran in there and got whatever LAPD didn't get on their first pass out of the house that he thought was incriminating. But they missed some stuff. They missed the chainsaw and the burn cage.
Do you think they gathered potentially from that house and how it was processed?
There's a number of things that could be ultimately retrieved as evidence, if that is the suspected location of the homicide.
And just to push back a little bit, when we spoke to Steve, he indicated there was nothing in there that she was killed or died there. But I don't know if investigators found something else that he didn't. I don't know for sure. But
yeah, remember, LAPD has the most pieces of the puzzle because they had access to the mansion prior to SF Investigates Steve Fischer.
Just giving everybody a little context there.
Sure. So ultimately, what could have been located is, particularly if David was staying there, would be, maybe some sort of DNA evidence. His clothing could have been clothing or anything that he may have had on at the alleged time of the incident. Again, if we're going under the assumption that he is the suspect. So certain DNA evidence that could be obtained from the clothing. If a computer was taken, then there's certain digital forensic evidence that could be on those drives that law enforcement could ultimately pull. So if there is a certain manner of death that's determined and we see that there is information on that hard drive that is consistent with the manner of death, or for an example, how to conceal a body and things like that, then that certainly is circumstantial evidence that would elevate and likely point to that individual, David, or somebody else at that location who had access to that laptop or computer committing that alleged crime. Also, video footage, assuming that there may have been ring camera footage, we can narrow down the time that the vehicle had left, the last time the vehicle was at that location, if it ever returned. Was Celeste ever at that location? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of things that could possibly be taken in as evidence. And also, we, again, don't know the manner of death specifically, but if there is something that would appear to be a murder weapon that does have Celeste DNA on it, then that certainly could be something that is retrieved.
And there's something interesting you mentioned.
So that does make me wonder about this knife that was found on the top shelf with the bowl. What was that used? Were there any other knives that they retrieved? Because Steve Fischer said that he had, seemed to have a fascination with them. So were there some other ones found? And did LAPD find some before Steve Fischer even got into the mansion?
About the computer, right? So maybe a computer would have purchase history, things that you were looking at. I'll talk about that in a second. But there's been a lot of talk about what David's relationship was with Celeste. It hasn't been confirmed by authorities, but there's been speculation that there was a romantic relationship and she's a minor. You think they're looking at that computer for any evidence to support that? And if that's the case, then you're talking about potential charges that don't even have to deal with murder or the concealment of a body.
Right. You're talking about felony after felony after felony charge.
Absolutely. And say, for example, this computer is a MacBook, so, for example, and with the MacBook, it's typically tied to all of the devices like iPhones and things like that. They're going to be able to see if there are any photos between David and Celeste in that computer or in those devices that would ultimately indicate that they did, in fact, have a romantic relationship, or what the nature of their relationships were. Also, we're looking at, or possibly able to view, text messages, what the text message thread between David and Celeste was, the conversations they were having, the level of intimacy that they had or did not have at the time that they were engaged in some sort of relationship. So all of those things will come into play. And another interesting thing is that with respect to Mr. Langston, it's going to be interesting to see now that he's been taken into custody. If he was taken into custody with his phone, for example, then that's going to likely be held by law enforcement.
Okay, so let's talk about what those charges could be that she's just talking about. So they're going through the California, it's illegal to have a relationship if you're 18. And in this case, David was 18 when she was 13. He was 19 when he was 18 when she was 12. He was 19 when she was 13, and he was 20 when she was 14 years old. So that goes into the statutory SA. I'm watching my words, Penal Code 26(1.5. And this law covers SA with someone who's under 18 who is not your spouse. It's a wobbler, meaning that it can be charged as either a misdemeanor or a felony, depending on the age difference. Now, if you are less than 3 years older than the minor, that's where it would become a misdemeanor. However, David was 6 years older than Celeste, so this would fall under the felony category. Because if you are more than 3 years older, this is according to Penal Code 261.5. So if you want to look it up, if you're more than 3 years older than the minor, you may face 16 months, 2 years, 3 years in state prison and fines. And then if you're 21 or older, he wasn't, and the minor is under 16, that's where it goes up even higher. It would be considered an aggravated felony. Then you have Penal Code 288, which is lewd acts with a minor. And this one is a felony. It's punishable by 3, 6, or 8 years in state prison. And then they have to register as an SO registration. And then there's Penal Code 287. This is SA, but using the mouth. This is also a wobbler based on if the victim is under the age of 14 and the perpetrator is more than 10 years older. Then there's Penal Code 288-4. That's illegal to arrange a meeting with a minor for under the age of 18 for SA purposes. And I say that because it's the illegal age of consent in California is 18. It's not 12. It's not 13. It's not 14. It's 18. So even if he didn't do anything with her, it's still illegal for him to be meeting with her for that intent, even if he didn't follow through on it. But it becomes a felony if you actually show up to the meeting. And we know that she was enticed, in my opinion, away from her family, and that carries a maximum of 3 years in state prison. And then there are also some important considerations, and then we're going to go back to this, which is that California does not have a formal Romeo and Juliet type of exemption that automatically exempts minors close in age from prosecution. They do not have that in California, but they are not close in age. There was a 6-year difference. Most convictions require a lifetime and long-term registration as an SO. And then stricter laws such as AB 379 have increased the penalties, making it easier for prosecutors to charge him. So if he took her across state lines to attend a concert, which may be, something that Neo may be testifying to, that is also a felony. And we have pictures of Celeste at the Fonda Theater, right, in the summer of 2024, where she would have been 13 at the time because her birthday was in September. And the pictures are from earlier. But let's continue on with this because I think this is
they can go and get a warrant in order to dump the phone, so to speak, or to extract evidence from that phone. So, and ultimately, if David comes into custody as well, any devices that he has on him, I've seen it time and time again, where law enforcement will issue or attempt to get a warrant so that they can extract the contents of those phones. So I think that the devices, whether it's the computer or phones, that ultimately may come into play, will provide critical evidence.
And I agree. So I think the computers and the phones, even if he has more photos of Celeste that would have been incriminating, even if he was able to get rid of those, any type of communication that they were able to dump from David's phone, from Celeste's phone, if they were able to figure out from looking on his computer, like who her provider was, because we don't know if he got her own cell phone, but it doesn't mean law enforcement wouldn't have access to this. And this is where those other felonies in California with this having an illegal relationship come into play. But let's continue on with this lawyer because she really knows her stuff.
And I mentioned if you go on the computer, right, there could be evidence of purchases. This is something that's come up a lot, the burn cage, this alleged burn cage. This was something that came forward from, again, Steve Fischer. So I go back to an X post that he had where he goes, although my words have been misquoted by some, what I actually said about certain items found at the Doheny address was that they were, quote, items you would expect to find on a farm rather than in a home in the Hollywood Hills. One of those items was a burn cage incinerator advertised to burn at 1600 degrees. Human cremations are typically performed at approximately 1400 degrees. An incinerator is not legal to use within city limits and serves no legitimate purpose at a residential property in the Hollywood Hills. Some will argue that this item was intended as a prop for a video. If that were the case, it raises several obvious questions. Why would a 55-pound burn cage be delivered to a private residence instead of directly to a prop designer?
It wouldn't. It wouldn't. It would go to the prop designer. It would go to the prop house.
Production house? Why would it be ordered before departing on an extended world tour? And why was it never used in any video production? It is also important to note that there were additional items present that could be used in conjunction with the burn cage. To be very clear, this burn cage was not used. It was still new and in the box. However, given that Celeste Rivas Hernandez's remains were ultimately found in the Tesla trunk, the presence of an incinerator at the same residence associated with that vehicle necessarily raises questions about intent. The burn cage was not taken during the search warrant, and because it was not used, it appears it's not of importance to any possible criminal investigation. but we think it's important context, even if not criminal. The burn cage and other related items were delivered to the residence under a false name, although the deliveries were accepted at the property. Attached is a photograph of the actual burn cage incinerator as found at the residence, along with an image from Dr. Burns' advertising materials for the product. Hashtag Celeste Rivas Hernandez, hashtag David. Now, Safa, again, just taking his word. I mean, maybe it wasn't taken into evidence. Maybe it was. I can't say. But that feels like an important piece of evidence in this case to establish, I would imagine, there was an intent to get rid of a body, right? We don't know for sure, but, you know, they might have an alternative explanation why that's delivered. But to me,
and I think it's possible that it was for future use too. You know, the chainsaw specifically, that they had trouble with what happened with Celeste, right? It was hard, so they wanted to make it easier for themselves, which is why they got that chainsaw, right? So was there going to be future victims, you guys?
do you think that's actually going to be a piece of evidence in this case or not?
It certainly could be. You know, it gives me pause because it ultimately was not taken in as evidence when there was that search warrant that was executed. And I think the prosecution is going to have to be very careful with how they play this. And again, a lot of it goes to information that we don't know at this time, which is the condition of the body, what it appeared to look like at the time that it was recovered, and what injuries Celeste had sustained, and ultimately a manner of death. You know, I don't know that or think that there's any indication that she was burned, and it appears that there was no use of this burn cage specifically. And so what's going to happen is ultimately it could come up, but if the prosecution, it doesn't feel or believe that it is consistent with her manner of death, that might be something that they want to stay away from, because they have to present things that are going to really show that this prosecution is credible, that it's truthful and correct, and that they have the right identity of the individual or individuals involved, and that the manner of death is truly specific to how Celeste was ultimately murdered. And if there's no indication that she was burned in that burn cage, then it may not be as relevant as we would speculate that it was. It's a very odd thing to have, especially delivered at a home and things like that, but we don't know for sure. And if we don't know for sure, then we've really got to be careful with how we use that and if that is enough circumstantial evidence of any crime. And right now it doesn't seem, at least based on the evidence that we've heard, that that was a part of any crime. So we don't know as of yet. It could come into play. And I think that this case is heavily relying on circumstantial evidence. So how the prosecution is going to attempt to tie and weave everything together against David, if he is the suspect, and anybody else from his camp that ultimately could be charged with Celeste's murder, is going to be very interesting. But they've got to really piecemeal key pieces of evidence and how they were used in the manner they were used, ultimately leading to her death in the way that she passed away.
And we're going to go back to this in just a second, but I wanted to give you guys a personal update for myself. For those of you that have been with the channel for a long time, you guys know that I was hospitalized about 1.5 years ago with sepsis, and you know, I survived it, which is really great. But what I didn't go into too much was the mortality rate of sepsis. So let me just share that with you. Because even if you survive it in the hospital, it doesn't mean that you're going to survive it long term. And so, and what happens is sepsis wipes out your white blood cell count. It wipes out all of your fighter B and your fighter B cells and your fighter T cells in the case. And so you know, and this is how I knew something was wrong. I had a change in my mental status, and that means that happens because your kidneys start shutting down and everything starts backing up. Your breathing goes up, you start sweating for no reason, you're feeling lightheaded, you're shivering. I had that symptom too. And I noticed I wasn't using the restroom. That was one of the big things that I had. So this is the mortality rate. This is something I didn't talk about. I'm really, really happy to share with you that I did get my blood work done. Let me move myself over here. The mortality rate of not surviving within the first 2 years is 50%. So I had basically a 50-50 chance if I was going to survive 2 years with sepsis. Now, I'm not at the 2-year mark, but on my blood work that I had done just a couple of weeks ago, because I had no immune system after the sepsis. My blood work came back and I didn't have any fighter T cells. I didn't have any fighter B cells. Those are your white blood cells that fight infection. I didn't have any of those. And that's what gets you, right? That's what gets you, is that you die of a secondary infection within the first 2 years. And this is the patient's mortality was obtained from Danish registry systems. After analyzing it, they found that in 2 years, 51% of the patients with sepsis were dead from any cause, including sepsis. So I was really, really scared. But I am really happy to report that I had my blood work done, and I do have my immune system back up and going. And I just so it's been, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's been a rough couple of years. I ended up purchasing a blood pressure cuff, O2 sat finger thing to measure my heart rate and my O2 saturation, because those are other early signs. Because every time I had an infection, I had to and if my heart rate went up or my blood pressure started to drop, which is one of the early signs of shock, is your blood pressure drops. And because your blood pressure drops, your heart rate goes up to compensate for the drop in blood pressure, because your brain, your organs, and that, want blood to be able to function. So, and I would immediately be checking that. And if my blood pressure was dropping or my heart rate suddenly went higher than 100, I would know that I was in trouble, and I would be, go running into the ER and just got taken care of right away every single time, and was just vigilant about my health. And the reason I'm sharing this is because of the statistics. This is something that nobody tells you, or at least nobody told me why I only had a 50-50 chance of surviving the first 2 years. Nobody talked about the fact that you don't have an immune system. So I just thought I would share this with you, because what I hope is by sharing this with you, that if this happens to you, you'll know that get your blood work checked often, and find out if you have your fighter B or T cells, because if you don't, like I did not, then you are going to be at a high risk. And this is why 51% of the people do not survive for 2 years. And I did not have an immune system for a year and a half. I just finally now have an immune system. And then I want to go over the sepsis symptoms, because sepsis can happen with any kind of infection. So you'll have what's a change in mental status, which means you'll be confused. And that's why the mortality rate, it's the number 3. It does away with more people in this country than cancer does, you guys. You'll have a change in mental status. That's a lot of times related to less blood flow to your brain. Your kidneys may be shutting down and stuff is backing up into your brain. You'll have shallow breathing. There's another sign, sweating for no clear reason. Feeling lightheaded, I had that. The shivering. And then symptoms specific to a type of infection. One of the real common things that causes sepsis is a urinary tract infection or pneumonia. In my case, it was just like a little ingrown hair, and you could still see my scar right here. And they have, and I tried to pop it myself, which, don't do that. And then the shock, which is, what I was into, and that's why I ended up in the hospital, not able to stand up, strong sleepiness. I was struggling to stay awake, and a major change in mental status, such as extreme confusion. And one of the things that set off an alarm for me was the fact that I felt confused. I was having trouble staying awake, and I was not going to the restroom. I wasn't urinating as much as I normally would. That had dropped, which is a sign that your kidneys were shutting down. So I called 911, but I was not able to articulate to my family why I needed to call 911, because they were like, well, why don't we just take you? And I couldn't explain why. I just knew I needed to get to the ER fast. And so that's what I did. But I'm sharing this in hopes that by sharing what happened to me, that maybe I can help prevent something like this from happening to someone else. If you do get sepsis, just know that your mortality rate drops, and you can end up not surviving the first 2 years because your immune system is gone. So if you survive sepsis in the hospital, one of the things you're going to want to do is go get a blood workup, whether you tell your doctor you want it, that you need it, go get a blood workup and find out if you have white blood cells. Do you have fighter T and fighter B blood cells? Because mine were gone. They were gone, and they finally just came back a couple of weeks ago. So I'm finally getting an immune system back, which means I'm going to survive that 2-year benchmark. But it can take your body up to 2 years to go back to normal after you have sepsis. So I hope that by sharing this, it saves somebody else. Let's go back into this attorney who is on Law and Crime with Jesse Weber on Law and Crime Sidebar.
And talking about pieces of evidence, what about the Tesla, right? It was found her body was found in the front trunk after it was taken to a tow yard, decomposed remains there. Reportedly, it was abandoned in the Hollywood Hills. There was reporting that it was parked there for maybe over a month. What information can the Tesla?
I'm getting a couple of questions. No, I did not get it from the gym. I just had a little ingrown hair. Let me move myself up for a second. I just had like a little, you can see my scar right here. Ooh, there it is. That's the scar. I had like a little ingrown hair or a little pimple, and I popped it like I've done probably thousands of times over the course of my lifetime. I still get acne. So I washed my hands and I popped it, but somehow a little bacteria got in, and I don't know why it went septic. And I had gone to the emergency room the night before. They started me on an antibiotic because it did look like it was infected. It still went septic even with that. So yeah, staying vigilant with your health. Don't dismiss any symptoms. And that's why I wanted to go through the symptoms of sepsis, because I hope what happened to me doesn't happen to somebody else. And also, once you are released from the hospital, they don't tell you that you only have a 50-50 chance. Nobody told me that. I found out when I did a follow-up visit with my doctor, which was like a week later. And then I found out a couple weeks after that I didn't have an immune system.
Provide, because Tesla's a very unique car too.
Absolutely. So there's a few things that we can look at with the Tesla. First and foremost, because that is the location where her body was recovered, we're looking at DNA evidence. Her DNA evidence, any other DNA or fingerprint evidence that may have been in that vehicle to show who would have been in that vehicle, who was driving that vehicle, if there's any fingerprints, hair follicles, things of that nature. Also, if there's evidence of a crime taking place in that vehicle. So we, at this point in time, don't know specifically how she was murdered, but she could have possibly been murdered in that vehicle. And if there is any indication or evidence that points to that act occurring in that vehicle, that would certainly be evidence. Now,
I'll be very surprised if that's the case. If it is, I think that the vehicle, I think that they would have that data from the Tesla, and maybe they wouldn't need Neo to testify unless Deputy District Attorney Beth Silverman's concerned that the defense attorney for David would have used Neo as their alternative suspect in the case, which is possible.
The uniqueness of a Tesla, most of us know that there are a ton of cameras on and around Teslas. So what would be able to happen is there could be a subpoena to Tesla for the video footage that would have captured the incident on the date and time, or alleged date and time. It would also capture if Celeste was in that vehicle or entered that vehicle while she was alive, who was the driver of that vehicle, if anything occurred inside that vehicle. It may not capture a specific graphic of the event, but ultimately may provide some information if there was a murder that occurred there.
And not only that, but it could also provide information if they were, if he kissed her or anything like that, which again would be a felony, right? It's a felony because there's a 6-year age gap.
Not only that, but if her body was placed in the front truck, I do believe, and I'm not totally for certain, but I do believe that there are some front cameras along the bumper of Teslas. And so that may capture her body being placed in that trunk as well, which ultimately could be used by law enforcement.
And so to be clear, there is a front camera right on the bumper. There's a back camera as well. There's 7 cameras on that Tesla. And I do believe that the LAPD did subpoena the evidence from Tesla, who would, would have to get it from Tesla. Now, if David deactivated the cameras, it would also show who deactivated the cameras on the Tesla and when, and whether or not they were reactivated at a later date. Let's continue on.
It's like a computer, right? It has digital tracking information too, which will be key. Okay, by the way, we've been talking about it so much. Celeste's body, okay? In any case, the body is itself has a ton of answers, has a ton of clues. But the problem here is there was a hold that was placed on anything coming out of the ME's office. The LAPD got a court order, so we don't know the cause, the manner of death. Reports like toxicology, those reports are sealed. Law enforcement basically said it's to preserve the integrity of the investigation. Even so, how much can Celeste Rivas Hernandez's body reveal about what happened to her, when it happened to her, and who might have done something to her?
In terms of decomposition, I think that they'll be able to name at least a time frame as to when she entered postmortem. Not only that, but the manner of death, the condition of her body. So if there appears to be a break along the neck area, then we know that there may have been some strangulation. Ultimately, if her body is still intact enough to show whether she has defensive wounds, there could be an indication that whatever ultimately happened, she fought back. It just depends on the condition of the body. You're also thinking about it being in a trunk. It's California, so the temperatures at the time, being concealed in a specific space for quite some time. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the toxicology report ultimately comes back. We may not have all of the answers that we're looking for, but I think that there will be certain key pieces of evidence. Again, for example, if there's a neck break, if it's intact enough to show defensive wounds, any type of toxicology that may still be left in the body.
And you'll recall that Sloan from Sloan Hooks went on YouTube. He said he had an inside source that said that there was like practice marks, cut marks, that somebody had like hesitation marks on Celeste. I don't know, how accurate that is. We've seen, also some misreporting coming out too. And I don't know if he pays for sources or not, but if you pay for sources, you're less likely to get accurate information. So I'll just share it with you with that caveat. But I do think that it's interesting, and I just thought I would add that in.
Whether that be any type of drug or anything of that nature that would indicate there was a substance entered into her body. All of those things may come into play, and there may be enough to have some of that once the toxicology or the medical exam is performed. And I'm sure it probably has been at this point. But again, as we know, they've kept that tightly under wraps.
And going back to where we started with the grand jury, again, this is all centered about if they are hearing evidence and if they are a grand jury that's impaneled to return an indictment, because there's sometimes grand juries that just, further an investigation, but assuming it's one that can return an indictment. You talk about evidence, you talk about testimony. I think it was TMZ who first reported that David's manager and the president of his touring company, Robert Morgenroth, maybe spoke in front of the grand jury, testified, because it was alleged in the courthouse hallway, he was overheard telling his lawyer that the prosecutor, so possibly Deputy DA Beth Silverman, who's a career prosecutor, was, quote, very pushy on why I didn't call police. I said I feel like I didn't have the responsibility to do that, and just wanted to continue with the tour. And by the way, David was on tour when Celeste's body was found. That was a tour that was canceled. We haven't seen David since. We talked about Neo, right? Now you talk about Robert Morgenroth. Value of his testimony, value of the evidence he has?
The value of the evidence may not be as significant as Neo or as David's testimony would be himself if he ultimately decided to testify in grand jury.
She's right, because if Neo is the one, and I feel like Nancy Grace really does believe that Neo was the one driving the Tesla. I don't know if that's true or not true, but I feel like that's what she really feels. If Neo was the one, the last one that moved that car onto Bluebird Avenue where Celeste was ultimately found in the trunk, I agree. I think Neo is the more important one to get on record, because that's the one that the prosecution is going to the defense attorneys are going to try to use Neo, in my opinion, as an alternative suspect.
Which I don't think is going to be a thing. But he will likely be able to establish a timeline of events in conjunction with the time of Celeste's murder. So again, I don't know the exact date or time that they're alleging she was murdered, but his tour manager would be able to testify as to where David was at that time, who else was there on tour at that time, the location that they were located at, if anybody entered or left, or what specifically he saw. And sometimes with grand jury testimony too, the prosecutors just like to get as much evidence as they can. Not all of it may be relevant, but all of it typically will at least establish some elements of the offense that they intend to charge and the identity of the individuals that they plan to charge.
A couple more pieces of evidence I have to ask you about. You mentioned timeline, right? when she died. We don't know exactly, but this is an interesting timeline because we believe that she disappeared from Lake Elsinore in 2024. There was surveillance footage from, I believe, March 2024 that was released. It was taken from a local liquor shop in that area. She apparently lived nearby. It seemingly captures her walking, then jogging down a street. She disappears from view. We thought that might be the last footage, but then TMZ obtained footage of what appears to be Celeste in September of 2024. And in this footage that was captured on Nest camera on September 8th, 2024, so a year before her body was found, she's seen having some sort of conversation with neighbors, reportedly over a prank that was pulled on her parents' home, potentially a ding-dong ditch, not entirely sure. And TMZ reported that there was maybe some racial slurs.
A ding-dong ditch is when the kids knock on the door and then run away.
That may have been asserted in this altercation. So you see that footage. And then Steve Fischer indicated that the last known photograph, proof of life, that he has of Celeste was January 2025. And then you couple that with LAPD releasing a statement that, quote, we have evidence that David traveled to the Santa Barbara area sometime during the spring of 2025. The reason for that trip is still under investigation, and we've drawn no conclusions at this point about the relevance of the trip to this case. Again, couple that with the idea of how long was she in that Tesla. I also have to say, I think it's interesting that Neo Langston, the house where he was arrested, his mom's house, apparently she bought that house in March of 2025. So if we're trying to set up a timeline here of what happened to Celeste Safa, what do you think the relevance is? What are you taking away from the evidentiary value of that timeline?
Absolutely. So what we know, at least if there's that last proof of life video from January 2025, we know that her body was recovered in September of 2025. That in-between time frame, which indicates that, she may have still been alive for some time, but there might be evidence that David came to the area that she was located in, at least.
This is David allegedly giving money in the Lake Elsinore area to kids that lived in and around where Celeste lived. And it makes me wonder, I don't know if what he was doing there, why he was there, but this is a photo that was put out. I also want to add a couple more things into that timeline. We know that the Doheny property, where we have the video of Celeste and David streaming from, and also the picture of them in the black and white photo where she's got her mouth covered up. The Doheny property was put back on the market on March the 7th. And then we also have the purchase of the red Tesla at the end of February, which I believe is significant because Celeste was in the front trunk of the black Tesla.
Maybe in March, she still could have been alive at that point in time. I think that there was evidence that she had been deceased for at least a month before her body was recovered. And so one of the things that will have to happen is that law enforcement's going to investigate if there's any indication that she was still alive in those in-between months of January to maybe July or August. If there's a footprint of her online or social media that is true and accurate.
This is the picture of them in the bathroom of the Doheny property where she's got her face covered. And this is David with his phone. So this is that Doheny property, you guys. And that was put back on the market on March the 7th, which means it would have been turned over to the owner sometime in February.
To the time that, say, for example, she posted something on social media in June of 2025, then we can narrow it. And if it's properly authenticated as her being alive and at that specific date and time, then we know we can narrow the timeline as to when she was actually possibly murdered.
Right, because remember in the Gabby Petito Brian Laundrie case, he was still texting from Gabby's phone when he was making his way from back to Florida, where he hid out at his parents' house, kind of how Neo hid out at his mom's house. Brian Laundrie was texting, posing as Gabby, trying to make it look like Gabby was alive. So I do think that that's interesting. So we don't know we don't know what law enforcement has as her final proof of life. All we know is that January 2nd picture that Steve Fischer has found.
Again, if we're looking at timeline and David being on tour, other individuals being involved, what the prosecution is going to do is narrow it down as precise as possible. And they may say something to the effect of, on or around August 1st, 2025, or between these dates to these dates, we believe that Celeste Rivas was murdered by this sort of manner by this individual. And so as long as the timeline adds up with who may have been available or present to commit that crime during that time frame, then the prosecution is going to narrow it as best as they can. And it may not be precise, but they will attempt to do it as best as they can.
She gives so much great insight, you guys. I think it's really, really helpful. Gosh, and just thank you so much for the €100 or 100-pound super thanks. Wow. Oh, thank you so much. That's so kind of you. Thank you so much. Wow. I think that's like the biggest I've ever received from a super chat. It's so kind of you. Let's take a couple of questions and we're going to continue going through this together. Latoya says, I think she was prego more than a year ago. Yeah, I don't know. We've heard rumors about that, but I don't know. I do think he was making promises to Celeste. I do think he was like, put that ring on her finger. I do think he was making promises to her. And Jazz is saying, please click the notification bell to be upcoming lives and videos. Yeah, I didn't have internet for a couple of days. Anyway, I have internet back again. I got it back last night. And then when I was about to go live today, I disappeared again. I just absolutely panicked. And then I saw that it came back on. So it says, I love the, I don't give AF attitude that comes with age. Yeah, I know. I do too. Tanner Josh says, me too. I rewatched the teacher clip. He said it. Thank you for modding today, Holly. Thank you for modding today, C Magic. Tara says, this picture of her looking at David, her little heart loves him so much. It's heartbreaking. If she only knew. I know. It's really sad. Latoya says she looks like that in the picture with the neighbors. And Jazz is amazing. Latoya says, very nice of you, and Jazz. And Tanner says, my insane rule, she loved him and he betrayed her. Yep, I do believe that he loved her. So let's continue on. I think she's really a well thought out, very precise attorney. And you can see that Jesse Weber's doing the same thing that we're doing, the same thing that Nancy Grace is doing. We're all doing the same thing, which is trying to put the pieces of this puzzle together, you guys.
Safa, one more piece that I got to talk to you about, this title transfer. It was reported that David had transferred ownership of one of his Texas homes to his mom's name at the same time that Celeste's body was released to her family. This is according to ABC 6. Two ways to look at that, right? One, something shady's going on. Or B, maybe he had a feeling he was going to be arrested and indicted and wanted to transfer ownership for financial reasons. Could be 100% innocent, or maybe just coincidental. I don't know.
Yeah.
So he said one or B. Why don't you guys put A or B? A, if you think that it was indicative of the fact that he was concerned that he had some liability related to Celeste, and B, if you think it was just a coincidence. Let's see where you guys are at.
I don't think there's often such a thing as coincidence. I think that, would certainly indicate to me or anybody in our profession that there could be some sort of reason behind him doing that. And ultimately one could be ownership. If law enforcement is looking at that location as having any key pieces of evidence to the crime, who has the ability to consent to the search of that home, or ultimately if law enforcement were to get a warrant, we now know that that home is no longer titled and owned by him, so he doesn't have that possessory interest in that home.
And that would be another benefit to him. This is the swatting that we've talked about, where his parents' house was swatted. Another benefit of him doing that move, right? We saw him move out of that mansion right after law enforcement served that search warrant. It looks like as fast as he could, he got everything else that he could out of that mansion. So they couldn't come back in with another search warrant to get anything else. Even though it seems like there was stuff left behind and including the burn cage and the chainsaw and pictures, a camera card was left behind. So I do think that that's really interesting too. I do want to do a huge shout out to and then we're going to go through some questions, to our executive producer. And just thank you so much for all of your wonderful support. Really, really grateful for you. And she did some research on this case too. Thank you to our producer, Sasha Angel, George Brown, Michael L. Cole, Christy Valentine, and Brenda Owens. Thank you so much for all of your support and help. And thank you to our amazing channel members. And then we're going to go through some questions with you guys. We're doing an extra long live stream tonight because I haven't gotten a chance to interact with you for a few days because I didn't have internet. I'm assuming some of you guys were in the same boat with me. But thank you to all of our wonderful channel members. Subscribing is free. It lets the YouTube algorithm know that I'm doing a good job bringing you credibly sourced information. And then channel membership is $2.99 for the channel membership. And it helps me out a lot too. It allows me to cover the case. I'm also curious if you guys would like me to do another video on the Gypsy Rose case. There's been a lot of new videos on her. Just if you are interested in that case, drop me a comment in the comment section below. So thank you to all our channel members. And then I also want to do some coffee, and then we're going to do questions. Coffee and gratitude to Michael L. Cole, Yvonne Lopez, Michael L. Cole, and also Reporter Room channel memberships to NJazz, Kami, and NJazz for the live stream, the most recent one that I did. All right, so let's let me put this back up. Okay, let's go through your questions that you guys have. I want to take some questions and comments from you guys. Okay, so we got the poll back. Here we have celebrity put A. Veronica says A. Terry says A. She says, I believe he knew what was coming. S. Lee says, I wonder if he left the stuff thinking they couldn't search the property again, but could whenever he was moving to, thought it would be thrown away. Yeah, that could be. Or he just wasn't thinking about that stuff. There's him waving that knife around. Steve Fischer talked about on Nancy Grace said he really liked that knife. Thank you for Tammy. NJazz says, if you'd like to become a channel member, she just posted the link. Thank you, NJazz. These are our head mods, Michael and NJazz. Julie, thank you for modding today. She said, and we did miss you. Glad you're back. I missed you too. Holly said, my husband wants to add a small dog to the pack. I'm like, no. Oh, that sounds, I think that sounds nice. But you got to both agree. Tara says, go ahead. You can never have enough dogs. Mine is still, your internet's still patchy, Celebrity Terrier Cods? Oh boy. I guess mine is a little bit too, because I didn't think I was going to get on today. Right as I was going live, I lost it. Let me put the comments back in. Michael said, I'd like to put that somewhere. And Celebrity said, I should cover the Gypsy Rose case. All right, let me back up a little bit and go through a couple more comments, questions that you guys have. Let's see if I missed anything. Tara says she got sepsis. She's over 3 years and is not back to normal. That's really scary, Tara. Get your white blood cell count checked and just see where you're at with that, because it will open you up to second. Oh, this picture that I'm showing right now. Let me back it up. Hold on, I just showed it. Let me let it play through for a second. This is David with waving that knife around. So that's one of the switchblade knives. Now, I think this is a different knife than what he has in this picture that I'm going to show you coming up here in just a second. The picture that I'm showing you, this is the mirrored head image of Celeste that was posted, and then posted with it was this picture of him waving the knife around. This picture, and then this. And you can see in this picture, he's got his hand holding up the knife with the cityscape. And I believe he was telegraphing to Celeste what he was going to do. This was right before her final photo that we know about, which was January 2nd. And this is him with those god-awful shirts. And there's him appropriating everything to do with Celeste. He's got her Hello Kitty appropriated there. And I don't think he's really crying. He did this in multiple shows where he, cried and looked sad, and the audience was like, "Oh, poor you." I think this was just a way for him to get attention for himself and try to get empathy from the audience, in my opinion, allegedly. You can see Hello Kitty stuff on his belt loop. Notice he doesn't look up because, He doesn't want himself to be caught on camera without having any tears. Oh, this is so hard for me, poor me. And I'll be really curious if those black tarps, if one of those tarps that he was painting the red shirts on is what was Celeste was wrapped in. We know she was found in black plastic. And there's him with Itami. And there's those white shirts and with the red paint splattered on them that we saw being posted around. And then he was holding mock funerals everywhere. And there's why I believe it was David's brother and that was Celeste. If you look here, you can see she was last seen in gray pants and Hello Kitty sandals. And you can see the girl with the hood on that was I showed you a few minutes ago with the picture of David's brother is wearing these exact Hello Kitty sandals. So a lot of people wondered if he was going to try to, get his brother to take the fall by trying to claim his brother had a relationship with Celeste. And that may be why they needed Neo to come in. I don't know. Maybe they were worried about that too. And there's David with that knife. And there's that photo that it was posted with. So my understanding is that this photo and the knife photo were posted around the same time. And this is David with the crown saying, "I love gore." And he specifically loved video. So I think that's really telling to you guys. All right. Well, I think I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for coming by to spend a little bit of time with me. If you haven't subscribed, it's free. It helps me out a lot. And I will see you on a live stream probably in a day or so. If you haven't subscribed, please hit the subscribe button. It's free and it helps me out a lot. Give this a thumbs up and drop me a comment. Let me know what you think about all of this in the comment section below.